Hello and welcome to this video, and on this video I'm going to be going through the 10 greatest musicians of the 20th century and 21st century. And you might think I've done this before, but this time I'm going to be looking at women musicians, female musicians in fact. So we're looking at the most important female musicians. Now, before we get on to all this, you will probably know that I'm not a big fan of, grouping people by identity. But this list was suggested by someone, and I thought, if you take the singers out, because obviously especially in popular music, but also in opera, female vocalists are so important. People like Bessie Smith, Maria Callas, Billie Holiday, all these, Joni Mitchell, they're so important to the history of music. And some of them are incredible musicians as well. Joni Mitchell's a fantastic guitar player. But I decided to only focus on musicians first and foremost. Some of these do sing, right? But they're not known as singers. What we're talking about is their musical input. And what's surprising is some of these musicians are incredibly important in the history of 20th century music, and yet they are not the household names that the men are, which shows that there is some sexism going on here. So on an individual basis, it's interesting to highlight these musicians in particular and actually explain why they were so amazing. The 10 greatest female musicians that aren't singers. That's what my list said here. At number 10, I have Hiromi, or to give her a full name, Hiromi, or something like that. I know I shouldn't have attempted it. Let's just call her Hiromi. Hiromi emerged 25 years ago. She was a sort of prodigy pianist from Japan. She'd been under the tutelage of Oscar Peterson, and she combined a sort of Oscar Peterson technique with much more contemporary sounding piano playing. She worked with Chick Corea. I think she had a relationship, or sort of mentorship, I should say, rather, with Ahmad Jamal. Hiromi is a virtuoso pianist. She also plays synthesizers sometimes, although she's mainly known as a pianist. And she plays in a style which straddles jazz fusion. Even though she's playing jazz fusion, the critics absolutely love her. She's been well received in that world. And also the audiences love her. She plays big gigs. And part of this is not only is she a virtuoso keyboardist and an incredible composer, she also, when she performs, seems to be connected in a way that musicians like Alan Holdsworth or Bill Evans were connected. When she starts to play, it seems that she accesses something which is other. This is quite rare with musicians. It's quite an incredible thing to see. But she does not seem to be playing things that she's rehearsed or she knows. She always seems to be, and not even thinking. She seems to be in her own world, which is quite incredible in Hiromi's case, because her compositions are so incredibly difficult. One of the great trios she had was a trio that she had with Simon Phillips on drums and the great Anthony Jackson on bass. Now, as we've got to Anthony, I received a message from Roland Vasquez the other day, who has worked with Anthony Jackson as well. And Anthony Jackson is not well, and I'm hoping that there's some sort of connection here or something that's happening over here that will be telling you that there's a gig or somewhere you can donate money or something, and we really should do this because Anthony Jackson is one of the greatest musicians. When I interviewed Simon Phillips recently, he can play. Simon can play, but he said her compositions are hard. Even he said it, and when he said it, made me feel good. I thought, at least Simon thinks they're hard. Hiromi, for me, is possibly, now can you think of anybody else? She's possibly the most important jazz fusion musician of the last 25 years. And she is an absolute virtuoso. She's got her own sound. She doesn't seem to be looking around, trying to impress people, which is the big fault of a lot of modern fusion. She is unafraid to go into any area. She is an incredible composer, but more than anything else, I feel that she has, how can I put this? She goes beyond the fashionable styles of the last 25 years. And I feel that that's become so important in the worlds of jazz and jazz fusion. She is not derivative, and yet she pays homage to the history of this music whilst being able to put it into the sort of, into the future. I really believe she is the greatest jazz musician on the planet at the moment. That's what I think with Homi. And she's only at number 10. Right, so at number 9, right at the other end of the sort of virtuosity spectrum, I've got from the Velvet Underground, Moe Tucker. Now, Moe Tucker is that little sort of androgynous lady at the back of Velvet Underground playing the drums. The way, what Moe Tucker does on the drums is so hugely influential in a band that is hugely influential. Now, normally when I come on here and talk about the Velvet Underground, I'm giving them a bit of a bash. Now, the reason I give them a bit of a bash is because the critics love Velvet Underground. But taking that aside, the history of drumming is such that there is a lineage that comes out of jazz, comes out of drummers like Baby Dodds, and then you get Gene Krupa, for the first superstar in music, first pop star in music, is a drummer. And he sort of codifies the way the drums work. You know, bass drum on the floor, you got your hi-hats or your left or right, depending on which hand you play. A couple of cymbals and a tom there and a tom down there. That's basically the drum kit. And then that evolves. You know, that goes into country music, rhythm and blues, the drums comes up. And by the time you get to the 1960s, rock drumming is starting to emerge. You know, you've got people like Ringo Starr, you've got like on the sort of more rhythm and blues, rock and roll end, drummers like Earl Palmer. And that's the history of drumming. It keeps going. It goes into jazz fusion drumming. And I am aware of that lineage because I'm a drummer. But what's interesting is there is a split somewhere there. And as much as I'm sort of describing the sort of virtuoso line of drumming, there's another line that goes somewhere else. And as a kid, I hated this. But there is a certain aesthetic which affects drummers deeply. And I think it's rooted in Moe Tucker. Obviously, when you get to the 1980s and you see Jesus and the Mary Chain and you can see them standing up, because she would often stand, she doesn't play a regular kit. That's the point. She goes for sound rather than the rock beat, you know, and the bass drum and the snare drum. She goes for sounds. She plays intuitively. And that influence I could hear in drummers like the Jesus and Mary Chain drummer, but also in drummers like Meg White, the sort of drummers that drummers turn their nose up because they don't understand that sort of, it is a feminine approach to drumming. Moe Tucker is an interesting character. She's quiet. She's not like there, for a lot of women in the industry are there because of a sort of sexual sort of reason. She's not there for that either. She's one of the first sort of, we could say, rock stars on the female side that is completely not that. They're few and far between. And she's playing drums in this intuitive songwriter aspect. If we go forward and we start to look at drummers like, say, Budgie with Susie and the Banshees, or the guy that played for Joy Division, now they're both really great drummers, but they're approaching the drums in a different way. In the 80s, when Peter Gabriel and Kate Bush take away cymbals and they go more for tom sounds, there's a certain line which ends up actually in sort of production drums, which is where, rather than someone just playing the drums, you know, people start to overlay toms and snare drums separately. And that then moves on to being program drums. And program drums operate on a set of rules which is related to traditional drumming, but is also separate from it. This could well be rooted in Moe Tucker, which makes her a very, very important musician. A lot of the musicians for the 1960s that are important because of their influence on later electronic music, right? And it's quite interesting the amount of female musicians that have moved towards electronic music over the years, right? The almost like the grandmother of electronic music is Delia Derbyshire. Now, Delia Derbyshire is a bright working class British woman, very interested in radio. She was very interested in mathematics. She was very interested in music, and she eventually goes through, ending up going to an elite university, comes out of that, wants to work in recording studios because her background in maths and electronics, I think she did a degree in maths and electronics, and then music, means she's perfect for recording studios. But when she goes to, I think she has an interview with Decca Records, and when she goes there, she can't get any work because of the sexism that existed at that time. So she ends up, after a sort of circuitous route, working in this experimental lab of music way ahead of its time in the BBC called the Radiophonic Workshop. And she's working with, tone generators, sine waves. She's cutting up tape. And she gets the gig to make the music to Doctor Who, which who wrote the theme to Doctor Who? Somebody Granger, isn't it? It's not Percy Granger, is it? Anyway, she receives this composition, and rather than just play it on normal instruments, she decides to create this swinging bass line, which she creates by mathematically working out the rhythm, dropping single monophonic tones onto tape, and then cutting the tape together. The rhythm is created out of cutting tape together. That method is basically the fundamental methods on which doors work, right? The Doctor Who theme is just so light years ahead of anything. This is like 64, 65. You listen to that and then go and listen to Pet Sounds or the Beatles, what anyone's doing, Frank Zappa, none of them are as far in the future as the Doctor Who theme. And when people saw that on the TV, they must have thought, I don't even know what I'm listening to now. Delia Derbyshire is so important. She went on, did all sorts of different themes throughout the 60s and 70s. She also was involved with a group, I think it was called White Noise, that made a few albums. And these albums are so important in the history of rock music. And when I say rock music, I mean electronic music. And so your Square Pushers and your Tekras and your Aphex Twins, all that electronica sound is rooted in Delia Derbyshire. Now, genius as she was, she seemed to be quite a troubled person. And by, I think she pretty much gave up composing by 1975. And, by the late 1990s, she was having problems with alcohol. And she died relatively young. I think in her early 60s, in the early 2000s. And not being around, this is often what takes the spotlight off certain musicians, and I've put it back on. So Delia Derbyshire is so important, one of the pioneers of electronic music. At number 7, I have perhaps, now I'm going to say this, is this lady perhaps the most important bass player in rock history? There's an argument that you could put forward. Of course, I'm talking about, Carol Kaye. Carol Kaye emerged in the 1960s as part of the Wrecking Crew. She was a trained musician. I think she was a guitarist originally. She could read. She got really good ears. She's a phenomenal musician. And so she ended up in the very male-dominated world of the Wrecking Crew of the 1960s session scene. But she held her own. She was the best, and she played on all sorts of records and was to be able to really lay the foundation of bass playing in the 1960s, remembering that the electric bass in popular music did not really emerge until the late 50s. Okay, so when she's in there, this is an instrument that's been around for about 4 or 5 years. Now, I have got a list of just the tip of the iceberg of some of the records she played on. All right, if I can find it. It's right down here. So, my glasses, but I'm going to have to hold it here. So, Carol Kaye played bass on California Girls by the Beach Boys. Can't Take My Eyes Off You by Andy Williams. She plays on Forever Changes by Love. She plays on Freak Out by the Mothers of Invention. She plays on I Don't Need a Doctor by Ray Charles. She's on I Am a Rock by Simon and Garfunkel. In the Heat of the Night by Ray Charles. She's on La Bamba by Richie Valens. She's on Spanish Eyes by Al Martino. She plays on Pet Sounds. She plays on Raindrops Keep Falling on My Head. She plays on River Deep, Mountain High, Icon Tina Turner, These Boots Are Made for Walking, Nancy Sinatra, Unchained Melody, Righteous Brothers, Wichita Lineman, Glenn Campbell, right? She plays the Bullet theme, Lalo Schifrin, the Dirty Harry, Magnum Force themes, all Lalo Schifrin, some of the greatest, music soundtracks ever. She plays based on The Italian Job by Quincy Jones. She plays based on Kojak, Mission Impossible, Hawaii Five-0, and The Addams Family. I will stop there. I think there's a strong argument that in the very male-dominated world of bass, which isn't like that now, women seem to be able to access and get things out of the bass, which men don't. I know so many female bass players with incredible careers at the moment. We need to champion them. They really are taking over, and at the moment, the bass player on the planet is Mahoney Day, isn't it? She is phenomenal. So, Carol Kaye, the greatest bass player of all time, or let's say most influential. I mean, in terms of the how many people picked up a bass because she played on a certain record, whether it be Frank Zappa and the Mother's Invention or Raindrops Keep Falling on Your Head. So that's who I've got at number 8 or whatever it was. Number 7 is Carol Kaye. So you can see this is a good list. It's interesting. Right, who have I got number 6? At number 6, I have the great Mary Lou Williams. Now, you may say to yourself again, who the hell is Mary Lou Williams? Mary Lou Williams is one of the great jazz pianists of the 20th century. Okay? An absolute virtuoso. She first emerged as a writer and arranger for both Duke Ellington and Benny Goodman. That's about as big as it gets. She was not only an incredible pianist, but she was a mentor and a teacher. And she taught a lot of the musicians that were involved in bebop. So her hand in the development of bebop is undeniable and huge. She mentored and taught Thelonious Monk, Charlie Parker, Miles Davis, Tad Dameron, Bud Powell, Dizzy Gillespie. When I did my sort of 10 great jazz albums that are like not well-known jazz albums, I actually drew attention to a trio album that Mary Lou Williams had made in the 1970s. And it's a very good example of her playing. And the reason I put it on is because I didn't know about Mary Lou Williams, and I've read loads about jazz. When I first discovered her, I thought, well, who the hell's this? And so I put her on and listened to her. And what I heard was a voice on piano that was like Thelonious Monk, or was like Bill Evans, or was like Bud Powell, or was like Cecil Taylor, or Chick Corea. This was a voice that I hadn't heard before. She didn't seem derived from anybody, because the reason is she goes right back to the development of jazz piano. When she's emerging in the late 30s, this is like 10 years old. She's a pioneer, and yet she was able to play and perform all the way up to the 1970s and 1980s. Mary Lou Williams is one of the great jazz pianists of the 20th century. And I think her influence on bebop is so profound that we can say that she had a huge influence on 20th century music. So we are going to move on now to number 5. At number 5, I've got Maybelle Carter, the sort of matriarch of the Carter family. So the Carter family were this family of musicians that were discovered on the Bristol sessions. In 1927, a record label went into Bristol, Sepal Record Studio, and they recorded a whole bunch of country musicians. And this is the landmark album for country music. It's the equivalent of the Hot Fives in jazz. The two great musicians to come out of it would be Jimmy Rogers, the sort of yodeling cowboy country musician that then influences people like Hank Williams, and then the Carter family, which is much more your sort of finger-picked acoustic guitar vocal harmony group. The Carter family is influence on 20th century music is profound. Maybelle Carter, great singer, but the thing is with Maybelle Carter is, and I've actually got some notes here to help me with it, because as you know, I'm not a great knowledge on all things country. But Maybelle Carter was the first music down, whether she invented this or not. I imagine, because we go right back to 1927, and how cut off these musicians were. That folk music before that, which is basically what country music is, must have been quite isolated. There must have been lots of different styles. And when they came in, her guitar style, which is an adaptation of finger-picked guitar playing, became the way you play guitar. The way she plays guitar became known as the Carter Scratch. Now, the Carter Scratch, to put it simply, is that style which goes... Shall I try and do it? Now, I ain't saying I'm doing this properly, because I am not a country guy or a finger picker. But I'll try and play it for you. I hope this is... Sorry, it's starting tune. I tell you what I'm very good at. I'm a good little bird, little bit. Country's not my thing, but that's all encompassing. But actually, the thing with Maybelle Carter is not that she did that and everyone copied it. She actually had a whole number of different approaches to the guitar, and there were 4 main styles that she used, which absolutely changed guitar playing. There's a million guitarists now trying to learn that guitar finger picking sound, and once they nail it, they can then sing their songs and everyone will be really impressed. This is fundamental stuff. Maybelle Carter, one of the most important musicians of the 20th century, and the Carter family, the songs they played, their influence on country music it's about the biggest you can get in terms of country music. Right, who have we got next on my list? At number 4, I've got Carla Bley, the composer, pianist and arranger that emerged in the late 1960s as part of, you'd say, coming out of the free jazz scene, going into the sort of jazz rock fusion scene. She is one of the pioneers of jazz rock fusion, without a doubt. She originally came in, she was the wife of Paul Bley, which is where she gets the Bley name. And then I think she then married Michael Mantler, who was another jazz arranger. Carla Bley, in terms of jazz, is an absolute giant of the music. She is one of the great composers. She has, written jazz standards. She is an incredible arranger. Now, I could go on at length about Carla Bley. When she died a few years back, I did a tribute to her. And if you really want to know more, you just go and Google Andy Edwards to Carla Bley. You will find that video, you can see that. I really want to hear to talk about her Escalator Over the Hill. Escalator Over the Hill, which was made between, I think, around 69 and it maybe 68 to 1971, something like that. This album is a triple album, 6 sides. It contains the most incredible varied selection of musicians, from Jack Bruce, John McLaughlin, and then Paul Motion on drums. You've got like Don Cherry's on there for, I think, is Gato Barbieri on there. It's just this wealth of different musicians. An Escalator Over the Hill is like a jazz rock opera, which takes you, it's a little bit like Lambs Lies Down on Broadway in a way. It takes you from the sort of West, the American, the American aesthetic. Lamb Lies is going from the sort of English aesthetic to the American. It takes the American aesthetic and it goes towards the east, it goes eastward, and it's sort of it's a very surreal piece. It's just such a huge epic. The arrangements of free jazz, the use of a libretto, the idea of a conceptual story. I mean, she does on this album, we sit on here and go, oh my God, ELP did Tarkus in 1970. it's like a whole side, and then Pink Floyd did Echoes, and then you have like Tales from Topographic Ocean, which is 4 sides of, you know. No, this is 6 sides, all pulled together, structurally and compositionally. It knocks anything the prog guys out of hat, because she could arrange so well. The first track, Hotel Overture, lasts a whole side. At number 3, I have Lil Hardin. Now, Lil Hardin, or to give her a full name later on, Lil Hardin Armstrong, was a very early jazz pianist. She first came to attention as the pianist in the great King Oliver band that was working out in Chicago in the 1920s. King Oliver's band could well be the first seriously important jazz group. You know, it's Fletcher Henderson was doing some more big band jazz at that time. Jelly Roll Morton was there, but I don't think he recorded before King Oliver. King Oliver goes right back to the beginnings of jazz. By the 1920s, King Oliver's lip was failing him a little bit. I think he had teeth problems. So he goes back to New Orleans and incorporates the great young virtuoso that had made a name for himself playing on Fate Marabelle's, you know, riverboats going up and down the Mississippi. This guy's known. He is the man. He's the Don. He was very young, very countrified, but they grab him and take him up to Chicago. That's Louis Armstrong. And Louis Armstrong falls in love with Lil Hardin, and they get married. Now, Lil Hardin is a lot more erudite. She's a lot more streetwise. She's a lot more business orientated, and she sort of smartens Louis Armstrong, who's just the sort of the genius. She smartens him up, gets a suit on him, starts to push him forward. He eventually leaves that group, and then he starts to make a name for himself and makes a series of recordings called the Hot Fives and Hot Sevens. These are undeniably the most important recordings in the history of 20th century popular music, 20th century jazz, 20th century rock and roll. And Lil Hardin is playing piano all the way. Her inclusion on that warrants her as being one of the fundamental musicians of popular music in the 20th century, without a doubt, as the drummers that are on there. I think Baby Doz is on there. All the musicians that are on there are really laying the foundation. But what's so much more important is I feel that Lil Hardin's involvement in being able to organise this and push Louis Armstrong to be able to totally change music. It's so much of this is down to her. And it could be argued that if we scrubbed her out of music history, that the whole thing fundamentally changes to the point where we might not have anything at all. There's a strong argument that she should be number 1 on this list, but I think just in terms of fame, I've got a couple above her, and I will try and explain why I put them above. So we're nearly at the last 2 now. So at number 2, I have Alice Coltrane. Much like Lil Hardin being the wife of one of the great jazz musicians of the first half of the 20th century, which sort of eclipses her a little bit, the same is true of Alice Coltrane. So when McCoy Tyner left the band in 1965, the John Coltrane quartet, he then brings in, I think she was originally called Alice McLeod. And again, they get married, they're a couple. And Alice Coltrane, and she's in those, really then pilots that last free jazz end of Coltrane's career. This is like really important. That would get her on the list. But that's not where the importance is. And I think the fact that Alice Coltrane was Coltrane's wife, that although they're very influential and very important, the albums that she then made after Coltrane's death, which takes Coltrane's free jazz spirit, but goes to where Coltrane probably was going to go, which was to a much more spiritually inclined music, which... and I think it's a thing that I'm going to discuss at the end of this video. The feminine energy. The feminine energy here. What we're seeing is there's a feminine energy. And I'm going to try and describe what that is at the end of the video. But it's so important. And Coltrane, Coltrane didn't make masculine music. What he made was tortured masculine music. It's a scream. He is fighting his way to enlightenment. Don't go. I've just... Oh, Have I really lost my power now? Can you hear my laptop in the back? If you want to know what that noise is, it's my laptop. I think we've had it. Good job at number one. I'll have to do that without notes. So, after Coltrane's death, she makes a series of albums where she's playing organ, she's playing harp as well as piano. Pharaoh Saunders is playing saxophone, who has sort of taken on the sort of lineage of Coltrane. And it's where Coltrane's music could have well gone. But the point is at the time, these albums were very well received. But I think they were seen as, oh, it's John Coltrane's wife. She's making these albums. They're very good, that type of thing. As time's gone on, it's arguable that on popular music, on bands like Radiohead, on electronica, on sort of Afrobeat music, on sort of ambient music, and even, I would say, because there's a darkness and heaviness to Alice Coltrane's music, some of it, which reminds me of the Mahavishnu Orchestra. And I think that those albums, it's arguable, are as influential, but on a different set of musicians as Coltrane was. Coltrane was influencing bands like the Byrds and the Doors in the 1960s, but Alice Coltrane was influencing bands like Four Hero, Cinematic Orchestra, bands like the Beastie Boys, Radiohead, right? And in a way, this influence is absolutely huge. And I think I wanted to point that out because I think that all the way through this, the influence of these musicians is you go, oh yeah, I hadn't really thought about that. There is an element of sexism there, but it's very easy to take on that identitarian sort of, you go, oh, it's sexism, in patriarchy stopping these people. I'm going to try and explain it in more detail at the end of this video, I think. At number one, I have one of the greatest musicians of the 20th century, right? One of the greatest. So, we've got Louis Armstrong, Muddy Waters, Ray Charles, James Brown, the Beatles, the Stones. We can throw out musicians, Chuck Berry. He was very important, wasn't he? I've done these lists, the most important musicians of the 20th century, and I don't put this person on. And maybe they deserve to go on, right? Maybe this is one of the most important musicians of the 20th century, full stop. It is, of course, the great Sister Rosetta Tharpe. Sister Rosetta Tharpe came out of the gospel music scene, which in the 1930s, when she sort of merges, I think she merges in the late 1930s, this scene is not married up with rock music. There is no rhythm and blues, soul music. There is no gospel music as we know it. The gospel tradition is something else. She comes out of that, but she is also influenced by blues and rhythm and blues. When she emerges in the early 1940s, we have a lady stood on stage with this deep voice that goes back to Bessie Smith, pulling on the gospel tradition, tiny little bit of country music in there as well, but standing there playing electric guitar with distortion and playing the licks that will be the basic licks of rock and roll. Now, if I was just doing this, I would be going, Muddy Waters made the blues electric. T-Bone Walker was the guy. Hendrix copied T-Bone Walker. But Sister Rosetta Tharpe was there at least at the same time, if not before. But more importantly, she was having hit records. This wasn't obscure stuff. She was a huge star. Now, I think, she goes through, when she arrives in the UK on that famous tour, and people like Eric Clapton see her, that's basically where it comes from. We can go on about Muddy Waters, but it's Sister Rosetta Tharpe. Now, when you go back and listen to Sister Rosetta Tharpe and you listen to what she's doing, you will go, that sounds more like Cream or, early Led Zeppelin than perhaps, Muddy Waters or Howlin' Wolf does. You may say that. I felt that straight off. As soon as I went back, I went, well, that's rock music. And she really is going back 80, 90 years doing this. She's right in at the beginning. The way she plays the guitar is so aggressive. It's people like Guitar Slim and Johnny Guitar Watson, those sort of, that zapper, the sort of brutal, attack, which I've talked about here so many times, but never mentioned Sister Rosetta Tharpe. Now, yeah, it's because she's female, but she's so charismatic. You've never seen anything like it when you go and see her. Well, go watch a video of her. It's incredible because it's so known and yet unknown. Your ears are hearing a sound that's you're so comfortable with, and yet it's this lady in the dress with the pearl earrings on, powerful lady, sitting there singing and playing the guitar and doing these solos. When she came to the UK and she did that tour, and she arrives at that train station, the very famous footage, and she gets out and, plays this insane, American rhythm and blues gospel music with a, biting electric guitar in a very English railway station. That is rock music. That's there. 65, she does that. That's it. That's it done. Forget Cream, forget Clapton, forget all the stuff we talk about. Sister Rosetta Tharpe is undeniably, and I don't realise it. I forget about it. I gloss over it. I've never put her on the list. I love her. I've listened to her for about 30 years. I put her in a box over there. It's almost like, she's done all that, but that's Sister Rosetta Tharpe. She occupies her own space. Now, I think when she got to the 1970s, she was then suffered with ill health. And by the early 70s, she died pretty young. And I've found that if a musician dies at 27 and gets canonised by the culture, then they become immortal. But if musicians die in another way and they're not around to sort of celebrate their legacy, if she'd have been around when suddenly the blues was rediscovered, and Santana was playing with, John Lee Hooker on albums, and U2 was playing with B.B. King. Then John Lee Hooker and B.B. King, they appeared in films. Suddenly, in the 1980s, we suddenly realised how valuable these guys were. When I met B.B. King in 2000, I felt like I was meeting God. And of all the people I've met, and I have met a lot of famous musicians over the years, but the one that, if someone said, who have you met? The first one I'm going to say is B.B. King. And now B.B. King's passed, you feel like you met something that is mythic. It's like meeting Poseidon or Zeus. And it was. The power of that bloke when he got out of his big white Cadillac backstage in Finland. Sister Rosetta Tharpe could well be, that's where it all comes from. Sister Rosetta Tharpe. So glad I've done this video. It's worth it. Right, so what do I think's going on here? It's very easy to say sexism. But what I think it is when 20th century music and 20th century entertainment kicks in, it's making a lot of money, okay? And it's allied, I think, in the early days to the sort of Hollywood film industry. And it takes on that sort of idea. The marketing is exactly the same. The recording studios mimic the sort of film studios. Film is making money right at the beginning of the 20th century. And by the 1910s, it's blockbuster stuff. So it leads the way. So music sort of follows in. And when you've got a mass media emerging, the way you market mass media is by creating superstars. And this is what happens. This is in terms of art, this is probably the biggest legacy of the 20th century, is your Madonnas and Jesus on the Cross are replaced by Elvis Presley, James Dean and Marilyn Monroe. And Marilyn Monroe is different to Elvis Presley because there's a sexuality there. And there's also a vulnerability there. And that gets marketed. So when the female vocals are completely changed in the 1920s by Bessie Smith. Bessie Smith is strong. Bessie Smith's going to take on the Ku Klux Klan, isn't she? She's strong. But Bessie Smith is chopped down. She dies. And the myth is that she died because they couldn't take her to a black hospital, although it's more complex than that. And then Billie Holiday emerges, and Billie Holiday is fragile. And Billie Holiday's vocal, which is very up close to the mic, sells that fragility. And that creates, I think, the great male-female archetype embodied in rock music. The women are the singers, the superstars are at once sexual but childlike and vulnerable. This isn't prevalent in music straight away, but the vulnerability is there with Billie Holiday. I've often said that in terms of singers, because this is where we talk with females in 20th century music. It's singers we're dealing with, and so you see that the Bessie Smith strong woman and then the fragile Billie Holiday actually marries with Janis Joplin, if you think about it. Okay? By the time we get to the 1980s, when Blondie comes out, Blondie sort of takes that Marilyn Monroe image and she consolidates it. And once Blondie comes out, it sells millions of records. It's like the industry then goes, that's it now. And we get a ton of those. And we end up with Madonna, who apes Marilyn Monroe, on Material Girl. It's like this is the lineage of it. And you could see this move all the way through this. Is she a Billie Holiday? Is she a Bessie Smith? Or is she a Madonna? Those are the archetypes that you have. There's a few others, but they tend to fit into that. There's the songbird, the sort of Kate Bush, Tori Amos. But the point is, because the music industry is entertainment industry, that idea of the Hollywood star gets embodied into this, right? Now, of course, the male one is the hero. This is the person stood up on stage. And I think in a predominantly sexist world where most of the musicians are men, most of the engineers are men, like they wouldn't have employed a woman in a recording studio in the 1960s in the UK, as we have said. This creates a sort of heroic aspect to the music, and all the great musicians from I would say Gene Krupa, like we said, first superstar in music. And then you got people like T-Bone Walker, Chuck Berry. You've got in the UK, The Shadows, Hank Marvin. All of these musicians are entertaining by getting in your face. And there is an aggressiveness and competitiveness to it. The Beatles are interesting, because I watched an interview with Gene Simmons the other day, and he said when he saw the Beatles on the Ed Sullivan Show, the thing that impressed him, he said that they were feminine. Now, what he meant by that is he was used to seeing the Elvis Presleys, he was used to see the Chuck Berrys, he was used to see like Muddy Waters. They're all lady killers in a way, okay? And I think in terms of instrumentalism, that is what you get. The great musicians, whether it be Hendrix or Clapton, or the John Bonhams and Keith Moons, they're all heroic in a way. There is a will, it's like Nietzschean will to be in your face. Now, I'm going to tell you what made me think this is that many years ago when I was at college, we used to put on shows. And the all the girl students came up to me once and said, "Can we do an all-girls show?" And I said, "Well, no, because that's sexist." I said, "I wouldn't do an all-male show, would I? So I don't see why you should do an all-girls show." And they said, "Well, how about we do an all-girls show, but the boys can be involved in it if they want?" Now, that was interesting. They said, "But we just want to put on the show. We want it to do a girls' show, I said, "Well, yeah." I said, "I've got no problem with that." And then when I thought about it, I thought, from an artistic point of view, I started to become very interested in thinking, what will actually be the difference, So the girls led a show. It was predominantly girls, but, if they needed a tambourine player, they went and got one of the boys. If they need somebody to, do the sound, they got one of the boys. It was that type of thing. So the boys weren't not involved in it at all, but they weren't taking the lead. What I noticed was that this show was completely different to any other show we did. And the reason is because on the normal shows, the boys stepped forward and the boys saw it as a competition. They would win their band and they would look to the band next to them and go, we got to beat them. We got to beat them. Oh, he's doing that. If he's standing on the riser, I'm going to stand on the shoulders of the singer. And it was that type of thing. It was a competition to come out top dog. When the girls got together, it wasn't like that. They saw everybody involved as being a sort of a family that were going to work together to make this incredible show. So they supported each other. There was no bands. There was just this great big glob of students that were helping each other through. When the show came up, they went up to the venue. They decorated it. They put lights up. They put the tables out. They put candles all over it. They came down and they made cakes and cups of tea. They set that out and they supported everybody, including the boys, who I just had to stand back and say, no, you're not involved in this. You can do that. And it was a completely different energy, and it was a very interesting energy. That energy of community, of support, of and the thing that was interesting is that the idea of playing fast, the idea of playing loud, the idea of jumping around, setting fire to your hair or whatever it is, the girls just didn't understand that. All they were interested in was trying to get the emotion of the music across. And some of them were highly skilled players, but that was not apparent. When we criticize musicians and start saying, it's just, they're just showing off and it's, I don't want to use the word, but, it's like musical masturbation, all those things that we know is the case. But we have to be aware that's the male energy that is within rock and roll, and that really subfuses it. Rock and roll is full of testosterone, but there's another aspect to it. And I think when we look at the really great musicians, okay, what's interesting is we can take that list and we can see that there are musicians like Delia, Derbyshire that are fighting against the male world that surrounds them. We could see people like Sister Rosetta Tharpe that are very masculine in their approach. Now, I believe that Sister Rosetta Tharpe was a lesbian. And I think that energy is apparent. So we're not just talking here about an energy that comes... It's all about energies. And I think this is aesthetic energy. And I think there's been a confusion in the first part of this century where people think that sort of energy that human beings have is not aesthetic. It's actually the foundation of truth. Unchecked. But your feelings do not denote truth. Your feelings need to be channeled into the arts because it's the arts that deal with feelings brilliantly. And I think rock and roll's been very great at taking all these sort of identity feelings, if you want, which sort of then that people try and make them into sort of statues of stone. They try and embody these as being, this is a certain person's culture. No, they're individuals. When I look at this list, we have musicians on here that were quite happy to sit in the background, like Kaye, and do the job, creating all the greatest bass players in the history of popular music. From the experimentalism of Love and Frank Zappa to the sort of Spanish eyes, middle of the road stuff, because she was quite happy to sit there because the bass, even more than the guitar and the drums, has to play a fundamental role in music. Most bass players are guitarists who are a little bit more introverted and are quite happy to just go, I want to play guitar, I want to be out front, I'm quite happy to sit in the background and do my little thing, And your Stanley Clarks, your John Entwistles and your Jack Bruces, there's something else. That's brought to the Jaco Pastoriuses and brought to the fore. It's always more complex. There's always two parts to this, but Kaye, there's a reason why she is so ubiquitous in popular music as a bass player. There's a reason why Sister Rosetta Tharpe is the first one in there doing that. There's a reason why Alice Coltrane is able to take the sort of fury and terror of Coltrane's music and channel that to a much more spiritual end, which must have been Coltrane's destination Anyway, there's a reason for all that. And what it is that men and women are different. I'm not saying individual people, men and women are, but they just are. The difference is quite profound. I don't think there's a difference between the races. I don't think that exists at all. But there's a difference between men and women in terms of energy. But of course, men can have that feminine energy and women can have that masculine energy, but there's an energy which is feminine and there's an energy that is masculine. It's like when you look out into the world. I've done a video of gone walking out into nature. And the heroic aspect of mankind to go out into nature and tame it, to build cities, and trains that go across continents. That's the male aspect of humanity. But the appreciation of nature and the tending to it, Mother Nature. Father Time and Mother Nature. There we have the great dialectic. And within the testosterone-fueled world of rock and roll, within that yin, there's that dot of yang in the music. In the music, there's that dot, and it's in these musicians. Going forward culturally into the modern world of music, I can see that testosterone-fueled aspect of music is now tiresome and played out. And it may be well the case that the reason why the greatest instrumentalist jazz musician of the last 25 years is female. It may be a reason why that is. And I think it's because what I hear with that is a different energy to your Chick Coreas. There's a different energy to Hiromi. It's fiery. It's in your face. But it's much more empathetic to the moment. She's far more connected to that. In other words, you don't feel like she's showing off, which seems to ruin so much of modern jazz fusion. I enjoyed that video. It was worth doing. It was worth doing. That was all right, that was. Oh, how many donuts have I got? Oh, I've got 2 donuts left in my bag. I'm going to go up the shop now. I'm going to get something to eat. Make myself another cup of coffee. Check the time. See what's going on. This is my 3rd video I've filmed today. I've done all right today. I'm getting a bit cold now. I need to get out of the sunshine. It's a beautiful day today. Beautiful day out there. Been out in it. The winter is over and spring is springing. It hasn't sprung yet, but it's springing. And that's all good. And I'm in a good mood today. I hope you're all in a good mood. I hope you're enjoying the stuff I'm doing. If you are enjoying the stuff I'm doing, please put a like on the video. Press subscribe. Do all that stuff. Go into my Patreon and become a Patreon free member or a paid up member. You can drop a little bit of money down. Is it down there? Because I'm mirror image, aren't I? So it's down there. Or you can go to my PayPal tip jar. I'll finish with a song. You're once, twice, 3 times a lady. Those chords are too hard for me to do. What are they? I thought I could... See, I always think I'm better than I am. That's a male thing, isn't it? I never need a map when I'm going somewhere. I'll find my own way there. So you'll... what would it be? You'll once... twice... Is it there? So you'll once... twice... Can't hear it. It's too hard. Lionel Richie, he's too bloody good. He's too good. Oh! You're one, twice, 3 times a lady, lady. I've got it, right. You see, sometimes you have to be still. It's hard when you're talking, and then it just comes in. So it's your once, twice, 3 times a lady. And I know, no, if you think it would be the dominant, you, that's then I love you. I think I've got it. You're once, twice, 3 times a lady. And I love you. Oh, you're once, twice, 3 times a lady. And I love you.
Sorry to interrupt this show in this rude and annoying way, but I just wanted to tell you about a few ways that you can support me here on YouTube and get access to even more weirder and wackier content. First of all, you could become a patron. You could become a free member or a paid up member. I have over 300 extra videos on there, and if you don't even want to become a member, please pop over, because you can access my collections where you can purchase even more weirder and wackier video content. If you want to support me financially with a little tip, buy me some biscuits or maybe some crisps, you could pop over to my PayPal tip jar. I also have a Substack where I have lots of clever, academic and thought out articles where I explain my ideas on art, culture and creativity in a more intelligent way than I do here, plus a whole ton of podcasts. If you want to know what my music sounds like, you can pop over to my Bandcamp. Over there, you'll be able to listen to over 50 albums, and if you want to access them all, you could become a subscriber. And last but not least, if you want to support the wonderful studio where I film these lovely videos, which is actually a charity trying to help people out in the community become more creative, here is the website where you could drop a few pounds or dollars or whatever the currency is in your country in there. Thanks for listening, and back to the show.